When we look back at history, it's much easier to lump eras into decades, centuries, or millennia, even though closer inspection, or if we've lived through any of these eras, we know that the beginning of any particular time period is quite different from the end. But generalizations, of course, make it much easier to talk about them. Myself, just now having completed 6 decades, forms yet another excuse to make a video. I'm not going to go into too many details because that's what I try and do each time I record something. But it's just interesting in a general term to look back and do some reflection, but not too much, because not only when we dwell on the past do we live in the past. I want to more look to the past to see what lessons can be learned from it, use them to keep working forward for the future. It's interesting though, when you look back, things that we were told how life would be different, what would be around. Certainly some of these projections were based on ideas that people in think tanks and scientists were working on. Some take us completely by surprise. 60 years ago, who would have dreamt that there'd be a computer in every home, video cameras would be accessible to all? But some things didn't come about. Who's seen the hoverboard? We don't see people using a personalized jetpack to avoid rush hour. But just this week, seeing some pictures that were posted concerning the first series of Star Trek, shows there how we have notepads. We have, or had for a while, cell phones that look like the communicators that they used. We have to ask, were they seeing the future, or did people subsequently look to these gadgets and realize that it would be a great marketing tool if today's gadgets were designed like them, because then people could really pretend that they were one of the Star Trek characters. Unfortunately, some things we don't have complete documentation on because of the cost of recording tape and agreements with unions. Much of the British television broadcasts from the 50s and even the 60s were wiped clean. Just occasionally bootleg copies do surface, and we're able to see snippets of these shows. But I just think, had I been born even earlier, it would have just been a group of old men talking about the old shows. The old, I remember when so-and-so was much better than this or that of today. And we just had to take their word for it. But with the preservation of materials, we can get down to a bit more of a scientific analysis. But even then you can't really say if something is better or worse, because different things mean different things to different people, depending on events in their lives and the particular age that they were. Nice to go on YouTube, see clips of the 50s and 60s musicians, but I often have to chuckle when I see the comments such as, "I'm only 15, I wish I had been born earlier so I could have lived through this era." Well, yes, it was an exciting time, but then again, you wouldn't be able to sit down at your computer and watch these clips. So really, everyone should be glad to have been born in the era they were born in, experience all these new and exciting things, because that is just part of your life. The other thing, looking back, having lived on 3 continents, speaking 2 languages and trying to master a 3rd, I realise, for me at least, it's much easier to learn a language in the environment where you're situated. I know my French and Latin teachers have great enthusiasm for these particular languages, but when you don't see any particular relevance for the language at school, or don't hear it spoken around you, it does make a big difference. There's subjects being taught in school now, or different emphasis on these subjects that were never the case in my day at school. But again, that's the changing world, different emphasis. Whether it's good or bad that certain subjects are being dropped, that's always open to debate. But I always take great solace in the comment that was made that one's education is what is left after you've forgotten everything that was taught to you at school. And that doesn't mean that everything at school is irrelevant, but the main thing in life, I believe, is to have that enthusiasm for learning and to know how to apply all the different facts that are taught to you. I know it's a great feeling of achievement to have passed examinations in one's teens, but looking back, and it's probably true today as well, a lot of it consists of learning from one particular textbook, one particular viewpoint, which with the years you realize how many more facts there are, how many different viewpoints, and although of course it's a great struggle when you're in school to learn all these facts, as you go through life and pick a career, how these facts will just form a basis for one's future studies, and what one works in, even a much smaller subsection of these topics. The other thing, looking back, when you think of 60 years, what it means, to a 10-year-old, or anyone a few years older than them is already old. 20 begins to be incredibly old, never mind 30 or 40. But when you look back, there's two aspects here. One is that, yes, people younger than you are younger, but you still have in your head all the memories, the accumulated memories of all these years. And although one will read periodically that the old people of today don't understand those young people anymore, I'm still not convinced that that's true. Yes, times have changed. In certain aspects the world has changed, but basic human emotions haven't. So people will always go through these identity crises, thinking where do they fit in, etc. Perhaps sometimes as we go through life, we tend to forget these earlier years. Things that perhaps seemed insurmountable problems are either just pushed aside or solutions found. They don't seem like problems anymore. Certainly one thing has changed with the world, and that's the speed of knowledge, or its transference. One, there's more people, more ways of transferring knowledge. Discoveries certainly seem to be, or major discoveries seem to be made more often. But in our personal lives as well. A letter was once quite adequate. Then the telephone call. Now it seems that if you can't communicate with someone instantly via a cell phone, the wait just seems like impossible wait. Some define it as life getting faster. Perhaps it is faster in one respect, but we're still people, and we still need time perhaps to think about certain questions that are put to us. So either we can ignore these messages that require an instant response, pretending that we weren't available, have time to ponder it and then give the answer. The financial world, of course, benefits greatly from this instant update of data. Interest rates can be set, economic policies changed in an instant. No longer do we have to wait for a letter to arrive, transatlantic cable, and of course well before my time, the ship coming across the ocean with the latest news. So it seems sometimes that we're totally inundated with information, but really as it directly impacts our life, it doesn't make much difference. But the news stations, of course, they always want to keep broadcasting, and as tragic as it might be for a particular natural disaster or killing rampage somewhere in the world, it doesn't directly impact any one of us. But yet there are some people who are just totally glued to the television for this. Probably anyone today, if you mention television closing down at night, they wonder what on earth you're talking about. People today have to think back quite a while to see what it meant for television starting up, or even intermittent programs throughout the day, the rest of the time being filled up with the test card. But again, that's the way the media goes. A long time ago they talked about the convergence of media. That definitely seems to be upon us, that we're not going to have the separate television, computer and cell phone, which has become a multi-purpose unit. But these are all the technological changes. Yes, it's a lot to have taken place in 60 years. But certain basic truths still remain, and that's people, emotions, and how we relate to each other. And that's definitely something to bear in mind for the future, because technology is going to change whether we want it to or not. People might bemoan the passing of the telephone box, the morning and afternoon mail delivery, and anything else that has gone the way, like many things with technological change, but it's people who remain central. And I don't want to sound too pompous in this, but I want to leave with the thought that yes, I've increased in knowledge in the years. I hope that I have improved as a person, but also throw it out as a challenge to those younger and older than me, that amidst it all, it's all about people.